Hi, on the Woodpecker today, I'm making more modifications on the water system at the cottage. Yes, but it's mostly how I did the frame of my pump surveillance system. You might remember that last year I modified the way I pumped my water at the cottage. I did this because I was not satisfied with the way my other pumps were pumping. Well, it's not working any better, and I figured out why. When the pump starts to work, I lose almost all the voltage. I didn't think of this when I did the wiring, but it's normal. I used a 16-gauge wire. It's way too small. I'm going to try to explain this phenomenon the best I can. That's because I'm not a teacher. To have water in my cottage, I have a battery and a pump. In an ideal world, if my battery was 12 volts, I would have 12 volts at the pump. But it's not really the case, because you have to imagine that the wires are super long resistors, and I'm losing some volts in those wires. This means that I don't have 12 volts at the pump. So this is the formula to find the voltage drop in a wire. To calculate this voltage drop, I need 4 variables. First, the K constant. This varies according to the conductive material and the temperature. For copper, at 75 Fahrenheit, the value is 12.9. Then the circular mill. It's a value according to the wire gauge. It can be calculated, but since it's also a constant, I'll just use its value from a table. And for a 16-gauge wire, its circular mill is 2583. Then the current drawn. In my case, it's the pump current, which is 9 amps. And finally, the length of the wire in feet. I have an 85 feet wire. And the formula goes like this. The voltage drop is 2. Yes, a wire has 2 conductors. So 2 times the K constant times the current times the length of the wire, all this divided by the circular mill. So for my wire, I have 2 times 12.9 times 9 times 85 for a total of 19,737. So if I divide this by 2,583, I should have in my wire a voltage drop of 7.6 volts. It's enormous in a 12-volt system. That's the reason why I have installed a new set of wires. This time I used gauge 8 wires instead, which have a circular mill of 16,509. So if I redo the calculation with this new wire, now I have a voltage drop of about 1.2 volts. This is way better. And if I check this with a voltmeter, I can clearly see that with my 16-gauge wire, the voltage drop is close to 7.6 volts. And the voltage drop with the number 8 wire is also close to my calculation. So that's the reason why I've added this number 8 gauge wire from the main shed through a trench that René dug, and the wire ends up inside the watershed. But now I have a small problem. Before, when I used to turn the water tap on, I had a light that indicated that the pump was working. This doesn't work anymore. I have to make a new one. But this time around, it won't be in a plastic box, but in 2 wooden boxes. For that, I'm going to use some thin cutoffs. Each piece has different thickness, but they should all have 2 parallel sides. When I have 4 different strips of wood species, I can glue them together. I put my glue up between 2 thick pieces of wood and clamp this. Now I just have to wait for the glue to dry. When it is, I make sure I have one side straight. Then I cut the other side on the table saw. I move the rib fence a bit and remove a tiny bit on the other side also. Now I need to cut a groove for the plexiglass I intend to use. But my saw blade is thinner than my plexiglass, so I move the rib fence again and make a second cut. Now it's perfect. But I'm not done. I route a chamfer on the other side of the groove. I also need to cut a rabbet for the back of the frame. I cut it in 2 passes. Now I need to cut a square hole for the display. Oops, I think I went a bit too fast. Plexiglass is harder than it looks. I check another bit and cut the hole, but way slower this time. When it's done, I just need to cut the tabs that were holding it together and check with the display. It's a bit too tight. I need to fix this. This is way better. Now I can cut it to the right size. And now I can cut my frame. After the first 45-degree cut, I take the next measurement with the plexiglass itself. I trace 2 lines at 45 degrees, and I transfer them into my piece of wood. Then it's back to the saw. I also add the stop block, so the other side will have the right length. I do the same thing for the top and bottom. Then I mark where I want the mortises and cut them. Now I'm ready to glue this. Not too difficult. I spread glue on the cuts, inside the mortises, add dominoes, and assemble all of it. The last thing to do is add some clamps. I make sure all the joints are perfect and leave that alone while the glue dries. So now I can begin to work on the second box, the one which will be inside the watershed. This box is way simpler than the other one, only 1 species of wood. But I also need to cut a groove for the plexiglass. And also a rabbet for the back. Now I can cut the sides of the small box. Then I glue all of it. I only need to wait for the glue to dry again. When the glue is dry, I'm not really finished because without splines, this box won't last very long. So I'm going to build the jig so I'll be able to cut some slots for the splines in each corner. When all the pieces are glued in place, I put a bit of weight on it while the glue dries. When the glue is finally dry enough, I can cut my slots. Then I look for something suitable for splines and sand it to size. When it's perfect, I can cut some small triangular shapes and glue them in place. And again, I need to wait for the glue to dry. But when it is, I can finish the box. I also cut a small chamfer around the box. Since I have the block plane in my hand, I can do the final touches on the first box. And cut both backs. I also need to do something to hold the back in place. On the big box, I want to put a button on the top. It's not big enough. I fix this. Perfect. Now I can check this with the electronics inside. Okay, the big box doesn't have space to spare. Now I can check if it works. And yes, it's working great. I can see on the receiver side the current drawn by the small resistor. It's now time to spray this. And I'm ready to bring them both to the cottage. Installing this is quite easy. I begin by screwing the back to the wall and remove it to screw it to the box. Then I put the box in place. I can check if it's still working. Haha, perfect. But I also need to install the transmitter. It's installed inside the watershed. Okay, when I turn it on, it's not as impressive as the receiver. But when the LED stops blinking, this means that both modules are linked together. And I can try this. So if I open the tap, a big red light flashes and I can see how many amps the pump uses, its voltage, and also how long it's been pumping. I really like my boxes. They look way nicer than my old ugly plastic one. And as a bonus, I even have more information than before. This was how I did my boxes for my new pump surveillance system at the cottage. And see you soon for another episode of the Woodpecker.